County, Oklahoma. And today we are going to be talking about conflict resolution for your community organizations. I'm so glad to have you here. This is a topic I'm really excited about, and I'm excited to share this with everybody. And I hope that there'll be some good tips and tricks and things for you to use and employ in your own organizations. But before we get there, I'd like to take this moment to invite Abraham to start us off with a prayer and get our heads in the right place, because not only is that the right thing to do and to give thanks for what we have, but this practice of connecting and aligning is really important for the topic that we're going to be talking about today, which is conflict resolution. So with that, I'm going to hush and I'm going to hand it over to Abraham Bearpaw, who is awesome, and it's going to lead us in a prayer this morning.
Wado, Lindi, I appreciate it. Wado, everybody, for joining us. Unetlanahi, we come to you in prayer today. We thank you for this day. We thank you for all the blessings that we have. We thank you for spring that's coming, for renew. We thank you for the rain. We thank you for all the vaccines that are rolling out, all the goodness that's coming, for the strength of our people that are coming together, Creator. Thank you for the opportunity to come together today, to fellowship, to learn, to help one another. Pray that you please just guide our words and our actions, that they're used in the service of our people, Creator. Pray that you please be with those who are hurting today and give them strength and give them comfort. We thank you for this day, Creator. Wado. Amen.
Thank you so much, Abraham. You always do such a great job in leading us through that, so thank you so much. Okay, with that, I also want to just start with a little disclaimer, which is I am in rural northern Cherokee County, and we are having some weather, which means the wind blows a little too fast or the wrong direction. My internet may not stick around. It's been pretty good so far, but in the event that happens, Abraham will text me and let me know we lost you, and we'll figure it out from there. But I think we should be okay, knock on wood. So thanks again, everybody, for being here today. Again, we are going to be talking about conflict resolution for your community organizations and what some of the strategies are, the tactics are, and the steps to get there. And now, there we go. This is what we're going to be talking about. Here's our agenda. We're going to talk a little bit about the conflict process and how a little bit of conflict, when handled properly, can actually be a good thing for moving your organization forward. Then we'll spend a little bit of time about talking about avoiding conflict and ways to, prepare for that, or to deal with the conflict before it becomes an enormous, big, nasty giant that we all have to tackle. Then we'll talk about the 6 steps to conflict resolution, and then talk about the tactics for doing that, as well as the spirit and intention behind conflict resolution. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. I want to bring out this quote here before we talk about why conflict can sometimes be good. So Jeff DeGraff is the author of this quote, which is, of course, innovation requires harnessing the positive tension of constructive conflict. And this is something that I just think is really is interesting. James DeGraff, or Jeff DeGraff, excuse me, he's an author who focuses on organizational conflict. That's like he's dedicated his whole life to doing that. And one of the things that he has particularly found is that conflict, when handled appropriately, can actually lead to some of the most innovative solutions, which is a really cool concept if you think about it. So I want us to focus on that today and really understand that there's some good that can come out of something like this. So I'm showing you this this graph here. This is something that I've spent a lot of time learning about this graph, and so I'm going to just kind of share a little bit of snippet with you. So this was conflict. The conflict process is something that I studied a lot in college and a little bit in grad school, and it was always really fascinating to me. So I'm going to walk you through this. Now, this is sort of conflict when we're talking about maybe like state conflict. So you can think about like this is maybe what you would think about in terms of like going to a war. Now, of course, it might feel like that sometimes in your community organizations, like we're in a war here. But so this particular drawing, this illustration here, is more like really big conflict. But if you break it down into, like, the cool thing about this is you can break it down into just about any level, and these conflict patterns still hold true for the most part. So we're just going to talk about it for just a minute to give a little bit of framework for this. Now, this is kind of theoretical as opposed to the practical, but we're going to make it really practical, and I'll show you throughout the course of this presentation how this kind of works together. So we've got intensity here. So as time goes on, you know, our intensity can increase, and then it kind of goes down once we start to get into the conflict resolution cycle. So let's say at the beginning, we're dealing with what we call a latent conflict. So this is something that's like, it just is the way it is. No one has really pointed it out. These are things, you know, people are just kind of dealing with whatever the conflict may be, just sort of on an everyday, you know, this is the norms of our behavior. For your organization, maybe it looks like, I'm going to pick on Facebook a lot today, just because I know that that's a source of a lot of conflict for our community organizations. So, you know, a latent conflict for our community orgs might look like we've got one or two people in our group who are always posting stuff on Facebook and it's not really relevant, or maybe it's not helpful and it's just really divisive, and it creates space between people, but we really just don't know how to deal with it. So we're going to just kind of like ignore it, or, you know, maybe it's just so normal. The fact that we even have Facebook in the first place has become so normal to us that we almost can't imagine life without it anymore. So that's what like a latent conflict is. It's not even a conflict. It's just things are the way they are, and maybe they're not healthy. Then you have this sort of, what in this illustration is called the conflict emergency. So what that really looks like is like something comes to a head. There's usually an event or someone says something and brings that latent conflict out of just like a normal behavior into, hey, we've got a problem on our hands. Now, there are different ways that you can deal with it there. You can kind of maybe flatten your curve back over, deal with it there. At some point, you'll probably have to escalate it to the point of saying, we need to deal with this. That's what the conflict escalation is, where we say, we've got to deal with this and do something about it. Up here at the top, we have the stalemate. Now that's if your conflict continues and you kind of get into, you know, tit for tat. There's all kinds of different ways that a conflict could look at the top here. But for us, it's the beginning of the resolution. So let's say, we'll use the Facebook example again. We've got this, you know, your community organization, you have a couple of people who maybe are posting things, like I said, aren't relevant, they're divisive, they're not really helpful, and they're really missing the point to the, you know, what your organization wants to do and what you're there to be doing. So somebody, maybe whoever the moderator is for your Facebook page, your board president, you say, you know what, this isn't okay. We need to do something about that. That's what we call the conflict emergency. There's sort of like a thing that happens that sets off, it's a tipping point for the escalation of the conflict. So then we say, okay, how are we going to deal with it? That's where your conflict is escalating. And again, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. You're just moving up the conflict from like, this is just normal, this is how it is, to like, hey, we really should talk about this and resolve it, to then getting to these points of de-escalation and negotiation. And we'll talk about the 6 steps for bringing us down the curve here, settling the dispute, and really building that peace moving forward. And so, you know, in war, we talk about like post-conflict peace building is like major operations that non-governmental organizations, nonprofit orgs, all across the world, they deal with this all the time when we're talking about war. And again, we're not talking about war, but this does still hold true when we're looking at an interpersonal or a small organizational understanding of conflict resolution. So again, I just want to point out that like moving your problem through the conflict process isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's a way that you can address issues that your organization has. So Oops, I have gotten myself tripped up. Okay, so now we're going to move forward here to looking at ways that you can avoid conflict to begin with. Now, again, if you remember, we're talking about this scale here. We're going up and then back down. If we can, stay down here where we're dealing with conflicts at a sort of a low level, then we don't have to go to some of those more extreme ways to resolve it. So here are some ways that you can avoid conflict to begin with. Now, when I'm not talking about like, oh, there's a conflict, we're not going to deal with it. I'm not talking about avoiding it that way. What I'm talking about is creating a culture of peace and working together. Now that might sound hippy dippy, but what I'm talking about here, creating a culture of working together and collaboration. So really looking towards getting your organizations to work in the spirit of working together. So some of the ways that you can cultivate this this good culture within your organization is to emphasize your organizational wide goals and effectiveness. So this is really all about like getting everybody on the same page. Hey, we're all on the same team. We're all going towards the same direction. Let's stay focused on that as opposed to, all of the different ways that we're differing from one another, but rather what are our commonalities? What are our goals? That's really what that first little tab there is. Building positive relationships is another great way to build a culture of collaboration with your organization. Building positive relationships between members and outside, and between the members and those that you're trying to reach and those that you're trying to serve. So just being kind to one another. Abraham's done a lot of really wonderful presentations for CCO, and I encourage you to go watch them. But just like how to build good relationships and keep what it means to be Cherokee at the heart of in the center of what you do. Using common language. And what I'm talking about here is trying not to be exclusionary with your language or trying to leave people out because they don't understand. So I don't see this so much in our community organizations as much as I might in something that's a little bit more established or has a longer history. You get into people use a lot of acronyms, and that can make people feel a little bit left out. Oh, I don't understand what they're talking about. And I'll never be able to overcome this barrier. I don't understand what they're talking about. So using common language that everybody can understand is a really good way to just foster inclusion and help everybody feel like they know what you're talking about. You're on the same page. Another way to build a good culture of peace and collaboration is to set expectations and accountability. So this is particularly helpful when we talk about our board members and our volunteers or anybody who's in a leadership position within the organization. It's always, I know everybody's a volunteer in these organizations, but it's still okay to have set expectations and accountability measures in place so that everybody's aware of what the expectations are. So for example, it's okay to keep your board treasurer on task to make sure that you have filed the appropriate paperwork with the state, for example. And if they don't do that, to take some measures to deal with that. And that in and of itself is part of the conflict process. Again, conflict doesn't have to be a bad thing. It can be a good thing when we deal with it correctly. And then finally, another way to collaborate and create a good culture is to have good standards of behavior. That means just being kind to one another, smiling, entering into meetings with an open heart and an open mind, because that really can change the whole dynamic. If you come in knowing that you're gonna, dig your heels in, and you've got a point to make, what's the old saying? You attract more bees with honey than vinegar, or something like that. I don't know why you want to attract a bunch of bees, but I think the point is that to be kind and to get more done, you can have these good standards of behavior that help foster collaboration. So here are some strategies. So we have these, this is the idea. We want to build a culture of working together in Gadugi, really. And here are some specific strategies and tactics that we can use for accomplishing that. So One thing is to create action items. So if you're in a meeting, for example, and everybody agrees that this is where we're headed, this is what we need to do, make sure that there are specific action items assigned to each person with a deadline. Again, that helps to set the expectations so that you can avoid getting into conflict because somebody didn't understand or they didn't know that they were supposed to be responsible for whatever. Meeting regularly and having a set agenda and an expectations for what's going to happen at that meeting is another great thing that's helpful to creating a collaborative organization and avoiding unnecessary conflict. This here, setting clear goals, or as Brene Brown calls, paint it. Now, I definitely jumped on the Brene Brown bandwagon. If you don't know who she is, she's got a decent, I think her books are better than her Netflix special was, but she talks a lot about, she's a social worker who studies shame, okay? Like shame, like how we all feel bad about things. But she has made her work very accessible to a large audience. And one of the tactics that she teaches in her courses and in her delivery of helping organizations to get more done and efficiently and create good cultures with each other is this process of saying, like, paint it. And I use this all the time. And when I heard this, it made so much sense to me, especially because I'm a very visual person. Not everybody's a visual person. So, there's some interpersonal communication skills that we could go into a whole other hour training about. But essentially, when we say paint it, what we're saying is, I need you to give me as much detail so I have a very clear picture in my mind of what you expect from me, and vice versa. So this is, when we're talking about setting clear goals, it's not just about goals, but it's about, this is how I expect maybe this to get accomplished. Now, this isn't about micromanagement, but it's just like, this is very clearly the picture that I see for whatever the goal is, and that everybody can visualize this painting together. So I definitely recommend you go check out Brene Brown, Paint It, and there will be a lot of good information out there for you that she'll say way better than I ever could. Now, another thing that I want to point out is that it makes sense to understand when or where situations that conflicts are likely to occur. I've got some notes over here, so I just want to make sure that I mention these. So some places that I have seen with working with a lot of our community organizations that are common places for conflict to occur would be things like Facebook. Folks are, not sure how to moderate these. People are, pushing back with the, they're pushing back on some of the standards of behavior. So again, Facebook is a place where conflict is likely to occur. Board meetings or leadership meetings are another place that they might occur, if, especially if there's a sort of, two different factions or more than one at all, two factions that are sort of trying to steer the organization in one direction or another. It can show up at these board meetings or leadership meetings a lot. Prior to a big event, this is sometimes where we see a lot of conflict happen if you've got a big event with limited resources and someone's saying, no, we need to do this, or we need to do that, or we need to do it this way, or this is how we've always done it. This is a place where that can occur. Budget approval, again, limited resources. Hey, we only have, $4,000 to spend this year and it's got to go. We got to stretch it around the block a couple times. This is a place where conflict can occur because people might have diverging or very different opinions about how a limited amount of money should get spent in order to accomplish the goal. Whenever you're setting the strategic plan or policies for your organization, that's another place that this could occur. In times of a crisis, man, we've all, I don't even have to mention COVID-19 at this point. We've all been dealing with a crisis for a year. And all of those things that I just said, limited resources, strategy meetings, board leadership, all of those things are things that are amplified in the middle of a crisis. And so it's important to know that, again, you're going to experience conflict and crisis, but being armed with really good strategies for addressing it at the onset will help you in that whole process of getting to the other side and starting to move forward with your organization. So those are some areas where I have seen our organizations struggle. And I hope that as I talked about those, that you feel a little bit less alone and understand that this is, just kind of a part of doing this work. It's important work to do, and we need to continue doing it. And conflict, again, is going to be natural and a normal process through that. And we are armed and ready to, go to battle with conflict and use it to our advantage. So here are a couple of things that I just want you to consider as we talk, as we go through this presentation. As you know, if you've ever been in any of my presentations, I really try to make them very interactive. It's a little bit harder to do on Zoom than before, but I'm going to go through these questions. I don't necessarily need you to answer them right away, but let's talk about them, and then we'll come back to them at the end of the presentation and consider them again. And then if we need to, we can have a conversation, bring some folks on and talk through this. So just for your consideration, when have you experienced a situation in which there's been a conflict that needed to be resolved? I'm sure that everybody at some level can answer this, whether it's in their professional life, their personal life, or their volunteer experience with their community organization. I think it's probably most useful if we think about it in terms of our community organizations, but any conflict can be helpful here. I want you to think about, as we move through this, if any of these strategies or tactics were ones that you used that helped you to resolve the conflict. And then just think about, how did that go? And then finally, are there ways that the outcomes of whatever the conflict was that you dealt with in the past might have been improved using these strategies or tactics? And you don't necessarily have to share those things with me, but I like to, as I'm going through these kind of exercises, just to think about these things from the beginning and then come revisit them at the end. So let's just dive in and we'll start talking about these a little bit more. Before we get into the 6 steps for conflict resolution, I do want us to kind of touch base and just sort of calibrate on this, because it's important to recognize the power dynamics that exist when you are trying to resolve a conflict for your community organization. Specifically with your role in the organization. Are you, for example, one of the parties in dispute? Like, are you, think about this, is there something that you have a problem with the way the organization is going, or you see an issue or a challenge that needs to be overcome? Are you perhaps the third party mediator, where you need to be the neutral person that's helping to bring these two things together in your organization and find some compromise and some common ground and move through the conflict? Are you the organizational leader, perhaps the board president or the moderator on Facebook, or the treasurer who has to bring your president and your vice president together so they're not at each other's throats, for example? It's important to keep those power dynamics in mind and understand, if you, for example, are the board president or equivalent, are you necessarily the right person to settle a dispute if you're strongly on one side or the other? Because if you are, then you might find that the other side feels strongly that they're not getting heard fairly. So again, it's just important to address those power dynamics and just be aware of those as you move into the conflict resolution process. And another point to bring up here is that it's always best to address these issues privately, especially when you're starting with the conflict. It's like starting with it. So again, if you remember on the curve, the conflict emergency, sort of the event that sets something off, that's something that should or could be dealt with privately as you're in those early stages, so that it doesn't look like it's public shaming, because that doesn't feel good to anybody. So we don't want to do it in that way. That's not a very Cherokee way to approach something either. And so that's we don't want anybody to feel bad, and that's only going to exacerbate the problem. So just keep those things in mind and think about the best ways that the best role that you can play in this. And maybe your role in that is to say, I can't play a role in this because I feel strongly one way or another. We need a third party mediator to come in. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a third party. It can be a neutral party from within your organization that can just help you walk through this. So here we'll go into this a little bit more. Okay, so 6 steps for conflict resolution. The first thing that we need to do is to clarify what the disagreement is. Is this, I want to, like, I'll go back to that, hypothetical Facebook post that maybe somebody says, I want to post whatever I want on Facebook, and you're not letting me post it because you're trying to censor me, or there's, fake news or something like that. We've got to clarify exactly what the disagreement is. And then we need to establish a common goal for both parties. And we'll talk about this a little bit more when we go into these in more depth. But the important thing here is to know that in order for the conflict to be resolved, both parties have to agree on a common goal, which is, hey, we both want to be able to use Facebook in a way that's not going to be divisive, and it's not going to hurt individuals who are using this platform, for example. The third thing is to discuss ways that we can all meet the common goal. And again, we'll go into these in a little bit more detail. Now, I think number 4 is one of my favorite parts of conflict resolution, because we all come into a conflict with these sort of like predetermined ideas that we can't resolve this conflict. And there's a lot of internal work, like within your own self, that can happen here. But there are some great strategies and tactics that you can use to clarify this 4th step. Number 5 is that we need to be able to agree on the best way to resolve the conflict. And so one party, for example, if we're doing the Facebook example, we may need to, to agree on the best way to resolve the conflict. Somebody might say, well, the only way to resolve this conflict is to kick the person off our platform. And the person who's in jeopardy of getting kicked off the platform might say, that is certainly not the best way to resolve the conflict. So everyone's going to have to kind of come to the middle and say, this person, doesn't want to be kicked off the platform, but this person feels strongly that they should. And we've got to say, where can we get in the middle? And this is where, clarifying exactly what the disagreement is helps us to bridge that gap and get a little bit closer to each other, and get closer to the resolution. And then the last step is to acknowledge whatever agreed upon solutions you've made and determine the responsibilities that each party has in the resolution. And again, we'll get into some specific tactics for that next. But before we get into those tactics, I do just want to talk a little bit about the spirit of resolution. These are all like values that are shown in a lot of research on conflict resolution, that when you have these 6 values and practices, when you approach conflict resolution, these are key. If these are prioritized, then these are all things that will help you through the process of resolving the conflict. So just respecting one another. I think so much of our society, whether it doesn't matter what side you're on, we're just in a hot seat of some disrespect towards one another. And so the hope with conflict resolution is that we will all respect one another moving into the resolution process. Generosity, having generosity of spirit, generosity of heart, moving into this and saying, I can be generous with you, and understanding that the other person will be generous to you as well. Humor is a really good one when it's used appropriately. This does not mean that we need to make light of the situation or anybody's hurt feelings, when you can go into it with a sense of lightness and, especially towards the end of the resolution, and then you can look back a little bit and just start to break the ice. It kind of just cracks the tension and brings everybody down a little bit. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to be laughing and you're cracking jokes the whole time. That's not what this is. It's just about lightening the mood a bit. Approaching your resolution with compassion for the other person is incredibly important. Compassion and kindness. What if the roles were reversed? That's what I always think about that. What if the roles were reversed? How would I want to be treated? How would I think about this? How would I feel about this? Silence, when I say silence here, what that means is just to be quiet while the other person is talking, and to really listen to what they're saying for the purposes of finding compassion and respecting and honoring their views, and not to be a doormat, but just to honor what they're saying and to truly understand it for the purposes of understanding and getting to compassion, rather than understanding it in order to be right or create a defense plan. And then also recognizing nonverbal cues is something that can be helpful as well if you are, adept at doing those sorts of things. I'm going to check in real quick with the Q&A. Oh, Rourke put the Brene Brown. Yes, thank you so much, Rourke. I really appreciate you putting that there. BreneBrown.com, and that's B as in boy, RENE. Brown.com. Brene Brown. She's amazing. Thank you so much for putting that in there, Rourke. You're awesome. Let's see. He smiles back. Thanks so much. Okay. So here are some strategies for resolving conflict. First is to address the issue head on and communicate with one another. I'm going to use a quick example from pop culture right now because I'm not obsessed, but I'm going to share it. I don't know if anybody else on this call has been following the Meghan and Harry versus the Queen of England and Prince Charles and William and Kate Middleton and all of their craziness. It's like my guilty pleasure. I really don't like to get into this, but it has been very interesting, as sort of a social experiment to watch what's happening. So what's fascinating about the Harry and Meghan versus the royal palace in England, if you don't really know what's happening, Prince Harry, the younger son of Princess Diana and Prince Charles, got married to Meghan Markle, who's an American, and she also happens to be of mixed race, which has caused a whole lot, all of those Brits have got themselves in a tizzy about that. But what's been really fascinating is the different ways that these two sort of institutions and cultural understandings of what is normative behavior or what's normal behavior or approaching this conflict. So Harry and Meghan are like, we're going to go talk to Oprah. So like last weekend it aired, they had this interview with Oprah. They're like, we're going to set the record straight. This is why we left the royal family. And this week, the palace has, the Queen of England has like officially responded in like the shadiest way ever, by like not responding almost. So the point is that there is one party that's trying to address the issue head on and explain what happened, and the other one is saying, like they're not allowed to respond, and so this conflict gets really super lopsided, and that's what ends up happening when you're not communicating with one another. So that's like a real that whole situation that I think is happening right now with the Harry and Meghan and the Queen of England is following along this curve really well, and it's sort of at the top of this stalemate because nobody's like, they're not addressing the issue head on, and they're just trying to play it out crazy on this, international media. I don't know. It's kind of silly. But I was thinking about that as I was putting this together. It was like, that's kind of what's happening. They're trying to address the issue head on, but they can't communicate with the palace because they can't communicate back, and it just become a big old mess. So we don't want to be Meghan and Harry and Oprah versus the Queen of England. We want to try to get our organizations on the same track and moving forward and getting the good work done. I meant, on this second one about humor, I meant to put where that quote came from, and I don't have it. So that's on me, and I should get it out of there because I don't want to not quote someone. But I do think it's true. One of the most powerful tools that we have as humankind is humor. Again, it kind of just breaks the ice and makes everybody feel, it can break the tension in a room when it's done in the right way and in a respectful way to all parties. So be ready for resolution. That's a really important part of this. I think this is something that we all of them as Americans, on all sides of the political spectrum, can deal with, right? Like, we need to embrace resolution and say, I'm open to relearning. I'm open to relearning, what my assumptions about you are. You're open to relearning what your assumptions about me are. We're in a judgment-free zone, and we need to be quick to forgive. And I wanted to share, I don't want to belabor this too much, but I wanted to share just a quick story because I think it's helpful. It was really helpful to me when I started to understand this. So I had a really interesting experience with forgiveness at a young age. When I was in 3rd grade, we had a dog who was half beagle and half black lab. So her instincts were going in 2 completely different directions. She was a nutty dog, but she was my dog and I loved her. I lived right across the street from my grandfather, who had chickens and goats and all kinds of critters. My dog would get out and she would go chase the chickens, and she would sometimes take a chicken out, and it would irritate my grandfather. But the dog was being who the dog was. In my 8-year-old brain, all I cared about was my dog. And one morning when I was in 3rd grade, I remember it was in November, it was a light snow on the ground. My dog got out. I couldn't get her back in because she's a beagle, so she's just running around the neighborhood. And my dog went missing for the whole day. We couldn't find her. After supper, my parents told me that they had found where my grandfather had shot my dog and killed her. And it created a huge rift in the family for several years. And as an 8-9-year-old little girl, I was thinking, oh my gosh, my dog is dead. I was devastated that my dog was dead. And at the same time, my parents had made it about this big push and pull between them. This was this was the straw that broke the camel's back in my dad and grandfather's relationship. And we didn't talk to my grandpa for 3 or 4 years, which is really devastating, because not only did I, as a 9-year-old girl, lose my dog, but now I've lost my grandpa and my grandma because of this situation. It was very confusing to me. As I got older, and there came a point in which my grandfather got ill and he got cancer, and my dad was like, this holding on to this resentment no longer serves me. And I learned that at a pretty young age. By the time I was 11 or 12 years old, I was learning that you can be hurt by something and acknowledge the hurt, acknowledge the pain, acknowledge the wrongdoing to somebody, but still also realize that pain and that experience no longer serve the highest version of who you want to be. It made a lot more sense for my grandfather and our family to say that was not okay. We were hurt, but we want to move forward with love and respect for one another. And my grandfather and I grew to have one of the best granddaughter-grandfather relationships despite that happening. And I was part of giving his eulogy when he passed away about 5 years ago. And it dawned on me that my grandfather taught me the process of forgiveness and just how powerful that can be. And so I share that because I want you to understand that I think sometimes we talk about saying I'm sorry in the process of resolution, but it doesn't really mean anything. So to me, I share this because I want to express that you can forgive somebody because and realize that, you know what, that feeling and the way that that happened no longer serves the best parts of myself. And that's how I like to think about forgiveness. And that is a tool, again, for resolving conflict in your organization. Now, hopefully nobody in your organization is killing your dogs. That would be really awful. But again, this there are ways to forgive even things that hurt just like really, really bad. Okay, let's go into specific tactics for resolving conflict through those 6 steps of conflict resolution. So number 1, clarifying what the disagreement is. One way that you can do this is by listening without pen and paper. Now, this is something that's really difficult for me because I'm not an auditory person necessarily. I like to write things down. It helps them stick. But sometimes when you're listening with pen and paper, what ends up happening is that you're writing down like rebuttals to everything. Where when you listen without pen and paper, what you're doing is you're listening to understand. You're listening to be compassionate. And it's not about listening for defending your position. It is simply just listening for connecting. That's the point there. Another tactic that you can use when you're starting in, step 1 to clarify what the disagreement is to rephrase and repeat in order to confirm that you're on the same page with the other person. So you let them talk, and then you say, what I hear you're saying is blank, or let me make sure I understand. What I hear you saying is that you're upset about blank because of blank. And that then they will say, yes, you're right, or no, you didn't quite hit the mark. Here's what I meant, or yes, and, or yes, but, and, different ways to modify the way that you understand it. And then do that the other way so that it's your turn or the other person's turn to talk. And the other, everybody's on the same page with that, repeat and rephrase, and both parties will listen without pen and paper if that's, a possibility. Meeting without distractions is also really important, doing it in such a way where you give some boundaries around it. Doesn't mean you have to say, hey, we're going to, we've got this big conflict, we're going to resolve it in the next 10 minutes. Give yourself a little bit of time to do it, but also, keep everyone on task and say, we can't, argue for 8 hours about this. We've got some boundaries around this. You're going to get 10 minutes, you're going to get 10 minutes, and then we're going to move through this. Okay. Step 2, establishing a common goal. Again, listening without pen and paper, rephrasing and repeating to confirm that you're on the same page about what the common goal is, and then agree on those intended outcomes. This is what we hope to get through this, resolved through this process. I'd like for you, as we're moving through this, to be thinking about those questions. Like, have there been any situations in which you have had to use these tactics, or you could have used these tactics and perhaps this would have gotten better results from the resolution? Step number 3 is to discuss ways that we can all meet that common goal. Now, this is really important, and this is why I wanted to focus a little bit on the, the forgiveness piece, and some of the, being just the spirit of resolution here. Look, you have to go into these things, and all the parties must go into this looking for points of agreement, places where we can shed light on commonality rather than difference, especially if it's been something that's super charged and super heated. We've got to shed light on these commonalities and see where we can bring each other together rather than, continue to create fissures and pull people apart. One thing that I keep in mind if I'm ever doing conflict resolution with organizations is that you're probably all trying to achieve the same goal, especially in our community organizations. At the end of the day, we're all really trying to do the same thing, which is to serve our communities, to create culture of collaboration, to make sure, to celebrate what it means to be Cherokee together. Like, that's what we're all trying to do at the end of the day. And so can you when you can remember that, it starts to show those points of agreement and points of commonality rather than difference. So I just want to bring those things up because I think it's very important as you move through this process of discussing ways that we can all meet the common goal. Remember that you have a common goal at the end of the day. Step 4 is, again, I think this is one of the more important pieces of this because it takes a lot of inner work and it takes like a lot of self-reflection to do this, to determine the barriers between where we are now and the goal we want to achieve. So one thing to do is to recognize and listen. That's what those active listening skills are all about. Recognize and honor, even if you disagree with it, just say that's that person's perspective and I'm going to honor it. Recognize and honor what everyone perceives to be a barrier to this. So maybe they say, all right, we'll take it back to the Facebook one. You've got the, you're the mediator and there's 2 people here. This person says, I want this person kicked off. And this person says, I want to stop being censored on the Facebook page. And maybe these people say, the barrier is that this person is going to be able to have access to the Facebook page because they're a vice president on the board or something like that. And they say, but they shouldn't have that. The barrier to resolution is that they're going to, abuse the power. So that's what this person thinks, where this person thinks that this one's trying to abuse their power. Everyone's got their own perceptions of what that is. And we've got to determine that is the barrier, address it, and then start to break it down. Acknowledge your assumptions about the other person. This is something that I think we can just all pretty well use in every day for just about anything. Acknowledging your own assumptions about people, about situations. Oftentimes, like, we go into these things with these preconceived notions about something that just aren't true. And it's okay for yourself to reflect on that and say, you know what, that's an assumption that's not serving me. And it's not serving anybody. So we're just going to kind of set it to the side and, start with a fresh slate, a clean canvas, if you will. Another thing to do is consider everyone's backgrounds and perspectives. And this is another one that's a little bit personal to me. I once had a person who was very close to me who had an alcohol dependency problem. They were an alcoholic, an active alcoholic, and they were really, really hurting themselves. And this person I cared about very much and loved them very much. And it was painful to me to watch them hurt themselves in this situation. And I had a mentor of mine tell me to think about that person as a child and how hard their life must have been that led them to depend on alcohol in this really unhealthy way and that would ultimately harm their body. And when I was able to reframe that and see that this person's background and the perspectives that they had growing up, all of the fears and the anxiety that they must have had that led them to this disease, it reframed this for me, and it helped me see this person not as someone that I needed to control, but as someone that I needed to love. And that right there was a huge turning point for my relationship with this person. And I can tell you now that we have a great relationship and they're doing very, very well. They've been sober for about 2.5 years. So that's wonderful. So it's, this is what I'm trying to reveal to you, is that these are things that are very personal. We all have conflict. And I'm wanting to just share these things with you so that you can see that these tactics can really work as you move through towards resolution. And they can apply in a lot of different ways, on a personal level as well as an organizational level, or even on those massive state levels, like we saw in the curve that we looked at the beginning of the presentation. So I hope that's helpful, just to consider everyone's backgrounds and perspectives when we're thinking about the barriers to the common goal. So step 5 is to agree on your resolution strategy. This is really where it's important to foster the spirit of collaboration and trust and respect with one another. We've got to be so clear on what the strategy is. who's doing what and who has what responsibilities. And again, this is where I encourage you to go back to Brene Brown's paint it. What does that look like when we're talking about our strategy for resolution? So let's talk about the example of the Facebook page again. So we've got these two parties, and this person says, you know, they've come to, perhaps the resolution is that we will, you know, will allow you to post, but it must, you know, we are going to set up these standards of behavior on our Facebook page. And one of them is that if, you know, that there will be no name calling. If a post, you know, elicits name calling in the comments and the author does not shut those down, then we will remove the post. You know, that like setting up a policy about the strategy that you're using to resolve the conflict, that might be a way that you in this example, that you can be really, really clear and paint the picture of what it is to resolve the conflict here. So then step number 6 is acknowledging the agreed upon solution and outlining all of those responsibilities. And this is where I think that writing things down might be helpful, and to have a neutral party to witness, understand, and help hold folks accountable for the solution. So this is, you know, this is where having, you know, the mediator and sort of a neutral party, third party between these two is going to help you to resolve this conflict and continue the peace as you move forward into the future, into the great things that your organization does. So I am going to now post these questions that I presented at the beginning of the 6-step process. And again, ask you, you know, when you've experienced a situation where there's been a conflict that needed to be resolved, were there any of these strategies that you used and you thought they worked particularly well, or particularly not well? You know, maybe you had a really different experience than what some of the research is showing. And so I'd love to hear about that, whether you want to share it now or, you know, talk with me outside of this, that's fine too. And yeah, did you use any of these strategy or tactics? How did that go? Did it work? Did it not work? Are there ways that you think perhaps the outcome might have been improved had you used these kind of strategies or tactics, or understood the conflict process a little bit more? And we have just about 8 minutes, which I hope is long enough to answer any questions. It doesn't look like there are any open questions right now. If you have anything that you're particularly dealing with inside your organization and you want to post that in the Q&A, I will be happy to review those and discuss those, but want to make sure that it's done in a way that doesn't call anybody out, because remember, this is like best done privately. You know, that emergency, the conflict emergency, the event that sets the conflict in motion, again, best addressed privately. But if you can discuss it in very vague terms, that's not going to call anybody out, be happy to discuss that now. While I wait for any of those questions to come through, I'm going to just let you know, again, I'm always available by phone or by email. And while I wait for this, I'm just going to give a quick update, because I know we've been getting a lot of movement on this. So quick update on the 501c3 process. And maybe that'll spur some more questions. So you should have, at this point, if you're in an at-large organization that is seeking their 501c3 nonprofit status, at this point, someone in your organization should have gotten an email from me, from an email that was it's 501c cco501c3@gmail.com. So it'll look like it's coming from Lindi 501c3. That's how the name's going to appear in your inbox, or it might appear, or 501c3 Lindi, depending on if you go first, last. but you should have received an email that outlines, hey, this is what we're going to be doing. Like, this is how the process works. And then you should have gotten a second email with the questionnaire in there. And that questionnaire is just designed to help break down these complex questions that the states are going to answer, or states are going to ask you as you file your articles of incorporation. And it breaks down questions that the IRS asks for you to file your 501c3. And we've tried to break those down into layman's terms and eliminate any duplication, get rid of any redundancy. And so all you've got to do is just answer those questions honestly. We're not looking to catch you in something. We will make sure that anything that needs to be said this way is said this way, or if this state needs this language included, we'll be sure to put that in there. Again, I just want to reiterate to you that we are never going to submit something without your express approval and permission to submit it on your behalf, or you can submit it yourself. But every time that we take something from your questionnaire and we put it into the official documentation, you and your organization will get a chance to review that before it is submitted. We're never going to submit something outside of your organization. And then, so yeah, you should have gotten that. We're working on putting, if you haven't started completing that, it's really, once you look at it, you'll see it's really not that difficult. Those questions aren't that difficult to answer, but you may need to take that to other members of your board and discuss that, other members of your leadership team, and have their input. I totally understand that. Just kind of let us know, send us an email. Hey, we're working on this. We expect to have it back to you by April 30th or whatever. Just let us know where you are in that process. We're always here to help you with that process too. I do have one question in the Q&A box. I'm going to go ahead and address it here. Eddie from IRACO Inc., which is the Illinois River Area Community Organization. I think, did I get that right, Eddie? They're along Highway 10 in Cherokee County, the river community there. Okay, so Eddie says, we haven't received an email about our 501c3. Our accountant asked for this information. Oh, it's actually Faye Morrison. I wondered, I was like, who is this Eddie person? I only think of, I think of Faye. But anyway, Faye, you guys did not get that email because that email was only sent to at-large organizations. Now, Faye, if you want more information about becoming a 501c3, we can help you through that process, no problem. If you would send me an email at this email right here, Lindi at epcollaboration.com, and we'll get you hooked in and help you with that process as well. So don't worry, you didn't miss anything. We were working with the at-large organizations specifically, but we're happy to help any of the on-res orgs as well who are looking for their assistance on that. Oh, Mariah. Let's see. Mariah says she's late to the party, but thanks for the session, and that they're going to use it for their leadership group. Yes, the NCCC Northern Cherokee County Community Organization has their offshoot, the Native Youth Organization. And she says, we've not had any issues, thankfully. Yes, thankfully, but believe that having a diverse board with healthy, loyal opposition to see varying views. I think that's great. Thank you so much. Let's see, Faye, they have a 501c3, reread the previous question. I don't understand the question maybe. So why don't you just shoot me an email or write down my phone number, and we can definitely discuss this afterward, because I don't want to mislead you in any one direction. So let's take that offline. Mariah, thank you for joining. I think you're on the road. So thanks for joining even with that. Let's see here. Let's see, I'm gonna dismiss. And I think that's it. Abraham, were there any questions that were out there that didn't get answered that we that we need to answer?
No, people just wanted to know where they could access the recording.
Okay.
And I let them know it'll be on the Cherokee Nation Community and Cultural Outreach YouTube channel.
There you go. Cherokee Nation Community and Cultural Outreach YouTube channel. As always, you can find tons of resources there. Diana, thank you so much. Thanks for being here. I hope that some of this was helpful to your organization. I know you guys are doing great work out there too. So if there's any, you know, we are at noon here in Oklahoma. So I will let y'all go about your wonderful day. I am always available for your support your organizations for the great stuff y'all are doing. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Abraham, thank you so much for moderating. Thanks for recording and making sure that this gets up where it needs to go. Abraham, you're awesome. Is there anything you want to add to this?
Oh, no, this is really great information. You know, I really appreciate it. I can definitely use it with organizations that I work with. So what Lindi?
No, come on. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful Thursday afternoon, and stay safe and dry and warm.